Welcome back to the Grief Observed podcast. My name's Brad Morrell. And if you would like to join me for an episode, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Grief Observed podcast. I'm also on TikTok under the same name, as well as Gmail, Grief Observed podcast. Send me an email and we'll try to get you on the podcast as soon as possible. My guest today is Caroline Shelby. Caroline spent more than a decade caring for her mother through Alzheimer's, and through that experience, she came to understand something more, I guess, that a lot of families discover the hard way. And sometimes grief begins long before someone dies. So today we're going to talk about anticipatory grief. But Caroline is also an author, and she has the book Living Beside the Leaving, a daughter's story of Alzheimer's, caregiving, and loss. So she is here today to speak about that, and we'll dive deep into the world of grief. So thanks for joining, everyone. Caroline, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Brad. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too, me too. And it's, the world of grief is very broad and wide and deep as well. And it just seems like there's millions of people who are starting to speak about grief. And I'm thankful for that because it brings in a lot of things to conversation that a lot of times we just don't think about. So, anyway, thank you for joining me. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about who you are?
My name is Caroline Shelby. I'm a certified grief coach, author, and founder of Grief Clarity Labs. And I cared for my mom for a little over 10 years as she had Alzheimer's. And while that was both a brutal experience, I think it was also a gift. And I actually think I'm a better person for it.
Mm,
I going in the past, I always associated grief with death, right? And I think a lot of people do that. And through this process, I was not only able to learn that that's not always the case.
I do believe that we often just look at grief and think that it's only about death, but we don't think about losing people before their physical bodies die. We don't think about the loss of a career. When people retire, that is a grief that we go through. So grief can be found in so many things. Often just we look at when a physical loss occurs, and that's not the case. It is so much more. In
Yeah,
fact,
no, that's very true.
when
And
I
and
started
you
this
don't.
podcast, it was mostly about physical death, and I've started branching out into other things a little bit. Of course, anticipatory grief is certainly anticipating the physical loss that will occur, but my it was one of the last episodes that I had. I was actually speaking about divorce that happened after a death of a loved one, so it kind of compounded this person's grief. So grief, can be found in many things, and it can be compounded and expanded too.
It definitely. And what you refer to is the term that you often hear is the secondary losses. And that's another thing I think a lot of people don't really think about with grief is they know that they're going to that they either are losing or can lose their loved ones, but there's a lot of fallout from that one specific loss and a lot of little micro losses as well.
Sure, there's loss of financial security, loss of a vision, loss of friendships. That's the weird thing is with death. There's a lot of people who you think will be there for you, and they're absent whenever the death occurs. And there's a lot of people that you never thought would show up for you that really come in a unique way. So sometimes it's loss, and sometimes there are some gains. And I would not be, at least this would not be my specialty in this career had I not lost my best friend 15 years ago. It just I don't know. Grief is not something you just wake up and say, "Hey, I want to work in that. That's cool."
No, and I think until you've until you've really experienced it and gone through it, you don't really know how to support someone through it, right? And you don't really know all the intricacies and all of that. I mean, I didn't even know grief coaching was a thing or a possible career before I lost my mom. And I had always been brought up, you said, I'm sorry for your loss. And people went off in their separate ways and you kind of pushed forward. And I always assumed that you just kind of moved on and you dealt with it. And as time went on, it got easier. I learned very quickly that that is not necessarily the case. And I think we very much live in a society right now that I think to your point, you are correct, and it is changing. And I think it's a very good thing. But for the last 20 or 30 years, grief has been a very taboo subject.
Sure.
You didn't talk about it. You kind of kept a stiff upper lip and you moved on, and you didn't want to bring the room down, and you didn't want to activate anybody or make anybody else feel bad. And I think talking about it is a very important thing.
Yeah. And, to expand on that just a little bit, I feel like a lot of times people believe that if I talk about the grief or if I help someone through their grief, then grief may visit my home. Even if they've had grief before, it's often that I don't want to invite that into my own life. So therefore, I think there's this big avoidance of, if I don't talk about it, then I won't be affected by it. And that's certainly not the case. Death will occur in us all, first of all, but also, your family will experience it. Whenever I was younger, I had this mentality that nothing bad could occur, that bad things only happen to other families. And I found out, at least in my teens, that that's not the case. Bad things do happen to all people.
Yes. Well, we're all brought up taught that, right? If you do good things will happen, and if you do bad things will happen. So I very much grew up with kind of this approach of, as long as I did what I was supposed to do, I was a good person. I supported my friends and families. I would live in this happy little bubble, and that is not true. That is not true. I mean, none of us are guaranteed to get out of this alive, right? We are all going to grieve each other in one way or another.
Yeah, that is called the just world hypothesis or the just world fallacy. And I've spoken about that way back in my podcast, but that is a real thing where we think that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, and that is certainly not the case at all.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not. Unfortunately, a lot of us have to learn that the hard way, but that's okay. That's why there's people like you out there putting the message out ahead of time.
I try, and it's I don't make money off of this podcast. This is something that I just enjoy doing. I've got a day job as a licensed professional counselor, and I enjoy it. But this is just my way of maybe continuing to honor my friend and make meaning of his death. This is I think we need to talk about it, and there's so many times that it's just easier to, like you said, go back to our own houses, pretend that this didn't occur or I'm not going through this, and really what it does is it causes more damage.
Yeah. Well, and I was also reading something recently that was talking about how looking at pictures and pulling up visual memories and talking about them can actually light up the same pathways in the brain as experiencing them in real life. So my mentor always said, helping is healing. And I thought it was a nice way of saying it, and it is very true. But then I kind of realized that there actually is science behind that, and helping other people and kind of bringing that message out and talking about your own experience is not only helping them, but you're able to help yourself kind of process and heal through that as well. So it's a great experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think they have to have life figured out or that they've got to be on the positive trail of happiness before they can help another person. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Certainly, you don't want to be in a destructive place when you're trying to help another. But I
No,
also don't think
that's
that,
true.
but I also don't think that you have to have it all figured out either. You know, I've been fairly transparent, I'll say, with clients and my own struggles with anxiety and depression over the years. And it's like, I want people to realize that I'm a human too. You know, we all have some element of the human experience that we're all trying to live through and learn from. But sadly, you know, that we often want to put on this show and just make people believe that I've got it all together, you know, and that I'm going to tell you how to live now. I never wanted that for myself. I want uh, to be able to show people that the things that I know didn't all come from a book, right? It's not all
Right.
from, you know, books or professors. There's some knowledge that I've gained along the way, and it's personal. And when I look at, you know, like your life, sometimes I feel like the best teacher is someone who has lived a certain experience. Before we go there, let's talk a little bit about who your mom was.
So this is one of my favorite questions. um, my mom was a musician. She was artistic, probably one of the smartest people I've ever known, and loved being a parent. She had her struggles. She did not have an easy life. She had a very, very hard childhood growing up and had her own battles. And some of that came out as anger and through her parenting, but she always showed up and was always there. And
Hmm.
that was one thing I really learned from her. And I never, I was never looking for her in the audience at any school performance or anything because I knew she would be there.
Wow.
I played soccer and I was terrible at it, a bench warmer. I would show up, I would play for, 5 minutes of the game, and mom would be there in the 40-degree weather, watching the soccer game, cheering for those 5 minutes.
Wow. Well, that's a big thing, just showing up, you know, and being a supportive person. You know, a lot of times I think we want our child to do one thing and maybe they choose something different, but showing up for them no matter what. And parenting is really, really hard. You know, I'm a parent of one daughter who's 24 now. And you know, I've tried to encourage her. Like she's an RN at a dialysis center, and I've told her many times, like if you want to go to school, I'll pay for it. You know, to for you to get your master's. And I keep saying you should do. You know, you should do counseling. I think she would be a really good counselor. But she's like, I don't want to do that, Dad. You know, and so a lot of times we try to push our dreams, our hopes onto our kids as opposed to just stating, you know what, you're a bench warmer in soccer. I'm just going to show up for that 5 minutes and support you because that's what you want. You know, that's cool.
Yeah, no, it was yeah, I was very, very lucky.
Nice. Now, do you have siblings?
I have two younger siblings,
Okay. All right.
so two sisters.
All right. No Y
One lives in
chromosomes in
Brooklyn
that
and one
family,
lives
huh?
in Virginia.
Okay. All right. Nice. So tell me, how old was your mother whenever she was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's? And did you see signs before?
So that's a little bit of a complicated because she was diagnosed way too late.
Mm,
Just because it had touched her family previously and she refused to discuss it or accept it in any way. So we
mm.
kind of had to wait to the point to where she was, for lack of a better term, so far gone that we were able to get her to a doctor and through the diagnosis without her fighting us.
So she was stubborn?
Um, oh, she was very, yes, she was very stubborn. As am I, which is why we often butted heads,
Okay.
but because when two stubborn people disagree, it's fireworks. But yeah, so she was only diagnosed for about 7 years. However, it was long before that we saw, and we really knew. We saw the losing the keys, the losing the password. There was a time she called me first thing in the morning, insisting people had broken into the house, and I get over there, and the locks were taken apart from the inside.
Yeah.
And
You know,
so it was, very clear long before.
sure. And, I want people who are unfamiliar with symptoms that, just if you're losing your keys and passwords, you probably, that's not an immediate diagnosis of Alzheimer's, right? I've been losing keys and
No, no.
passwords for years, which I attribute to ADHD inattentive. But when you start talking about, other symptoms, aggravation, there's so many symptoms that,
Getting lost, going to places she had gone
sure.
my whole life. And there were also there were very early on, there were some, looking back, there were some very clear personality changes.
Yeah.
She was someone who loved to travel and then suddenly never wanted to leave her home. She
Mm.
was a big quilter and knitter and suddenly couldn't follow patterns, or didn't want to go to her quilting class because she couldn't follow along and the instructor was terrible, and always blaming it on the outward, but there were little key signs.
Yeah. And how old was your mother when this all started?
So this all started in her early to mid 60s, so she was early onset. She
Yeah.
was early 60s. She was 73 when she passed.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm certainly sorry. And so you were a pretty big part of I guess caregiving then, I would imagine, and watching her through a lot of this process for that 7 years.
Yes. So the three of us kind of divided up. My sister who was always the favorite, to be honest, and we called the mom whisper, had the kind of logistical, medical, and kind of getting her through, and the financial and all of that. I was the only one who was close with a car, so I was kind of the day to day, making the
Mm.
meals, doing the grocery shopping, and that sort of thing. And then my sister, further away, was kind of the calendar management and kind of the researcher, and kind of saying, hey, maybe we could try this or do this or that sort of thing. So we all very quickly kind of navigated to our own little hats, which was nice because we were able to kind of work very, very well together.
Yeah, I've got an older sister and a younger sister, and hopefully, if it ever comes down to that's the way we can operate. Because one of our sisters lives quite a bit further away from me and my younger sister. But I've talked to my Navy friend who's more like a brother, Don, about this. He lost both of his parents to Alzheimer's within the same year. This has probably been about 4 or 5 years ago. And he called me up one day, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I think it's certainly necessary in this conversation. He called me up and he said, Brad, you're not going to understand what I need to tell you. But he said, just hope that your parents just fall over dead of a heart attack. And he said, this has been so painful to watch. And it can be a long process. His parents was quite a bit shorter than the 7 years and 10 years that you're speaking of, caring for your mother. I don't think it was quite as lengthy for him, but certainly, as you stated, there's signs along the way, things that say that doesn't seem like mom or that doesn't seem like dad. And then it's like the wheels start coming off and you start seeing more and more signs. And the progression, I think it's almost like a train. It builds up momentum and there's no slowing it down.
That's very true. I mean, and then with Alzheimer's, there's key things of the first time they forget who you are.
Mm.
The first time they ask to go home standing in their own house. And there's a lot of those little micro losses. And the crazy thing is that can happen in 1 minute, and 10 minutes later, they're talking to you about a memory they had with you from 15 years back, and it oscillates very quickly.
Yeah, I don't know how I would handle um, one of my parents not knowing me. Like to me, that I feel the pain of that when you speak of that, just in my own life, thinking, what would I do if my dad says he doesn't know me?
It was, yeah, that was that. I actually still very much remember picturing the exact place where I was. I was cooking dinner. She started talking to me about her oldest daughter who went to Goucher, named Carolyn, who was obviously me.
Hmm.
And I gently tried to prompt her, hey, that's me, mom, blah blah blah. And I wasn't getting through. And it was kind of, I realized in that moment I kind of had a choice. I could break down and further scare her, or I could just try to get through the moment and internalize it and deal with it later, which is what I did. And looking back, the one thing I would tell myself is also that she knew she was comfortable talking to me, and she knew I was somebody who was there to help her, and that sort of thing. And so in a lot of ways she still knew me in the role I had. She just didn't know my true identity.
You know, uh, in my weird and twisted mind, I sit here and think, maybe that's how I would find out what my parents really think of me. So tell me about your son, Brad. What do you think of him? No, I joke. I certainly, I hope I never have to experience it. And I hope, that, a lot of listeners will never have to experience that. And if they have, I hope they can relate and take comfort in some of the words that you're stating. What is maybe one of the most memorable moments in your mother's illness that you uh, can recall? Like what's something
So
that
one of my fondest memories is and it was actually one of the last times I actually got to see her awake. um we had brought my sister's new son over to meet his grandmother. Not that either of them would remember it, but it was still kind of something we wanted to do for ourselves.
sure.
And she, I think, on some level understood and enjoyed the interaction, and it was a great interaction. We were having a great, very happy visit, and there was some music playing, and I recognized the composer as one of her favorites. And I had just asked her, did you play this piece, Mom? And she looked at me, and I actually was able to physically kind of watch that veil lift
Mm,
and her go back and think and remember, and
yeah.
her face brighten up. And she just very happily, the way as though we were sitting at the dining room table, just kind of said parts of it.
Mm,
And that was it. That was all I got. But it was just that moment of knowing that, and that reminder that she was still in there, and
yeah.
of who she was, and getting to revisit that, because she hadn't really spoken in probably 3 or 4 years at that point.
Wow.
Uh,
There's one weird study out there with Alzheimer's that I always think of, and it's to me maybe one of those Hail Mary type of passes at the end of the game, just trying for anything to get someone to recall certain information. But I forget where the study was done, but they gave a bunch of Alzheimer's patients a nicotine patch. And believe it or not, these patients actually started remembering a lot of things. And I just found that so unique. I don't know if they've done more studies about nicotine and Alzheimer's, but just really interesting things. Do you recall any moments where you had, I won't say a Hail Mary moment, but something that you tried that maybe didn't bring as much success as what you had hoped for? Maybe it's a medication, or do you feel like,
so after she was diagnosed, we did try. we did try medications,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And actually, I can't remember what the medication was, but and we had hope, and for a day it seemed to work, and then the paranoia and the hallucinations
Mm.
came back tenfold, and it was just kind of going back to, okay, well, let's pivot and try something else. In the end, we actually were there was not a lot we were able to try, um but that was there are certainly moments of that.
Yeah. Was there any time in caregiving where you felt, I don't know, resentment or anger or exhaustion and just wanted that moment to be over, the caregiving?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a there were multiple times I mean, I can remember saying to my sister, sometimes I just want to put a pillow over her head.
Mm.
Just
Yeah.
sometimes I want to make this over for all of us.
Sure.
She's suffering, we're suffering. How long does this have to go on? But
Hmm. Are there other emotions that you think caregivers are too afraid to speak out loud? Because what you're stating, I hear in a lot of people. Like I've worked with a lot of people who did caregiving with a relative. Um, it is exhausting. It is brutal. It's physically demanding. It's mentally demanding. It is spiritually demanding for those that have spiritual beliefs. Like there is so much involved with caregiving, and I feel like a lot of those people hold in a lot of their emotion. It's like I don't have the I don't have the energy to speak my emotions out because all my energy is being placed in this individual and their care. What do you think about that?
I think that's very true. And I think looking back on it, and this might sound a little toxic positivity, but it's an honest, I have gratitude for it. I
Mm.
do. Because I look back on those 10 years and it was brutal. And I did not, and it was, I lost pieces of who I was. I lost my job. I lost a lot of my life. I lost friends. But I also look back on the time I got to spend with my mom. I
Mm.
was cooking with her in the kitchen, multiple times a week, and we would laugh. We got to sit and we got to watch the Yankees games together. And early on, there were times where I could still ask her questions about her life and about, who she was and her experiences. And there's laughter we shared, and there are memories that we have that I don't know I would have even taken the time to make.
Mm.
I was given the opportunity because I went and I did some of those things because I had to. I was a 35-year-old. I didn't want to be spending my Friday night in my mom's living room, right?
Sure.
There were, you know, but looking back, I am so thankful for some of those Friday nights and that I had those experiences.
How does grieving and mourning, because even in anticipatory grief, there's also mourning. Physical signs that you're grieving within. How did grief and mourning change from when your mother was physically here to when she was physically not here?
So, another unspoken emotion was the relief. You
Yeah,
know, there was a definitely relief that she was gone. There was
suffering's over,
also a
right?
loss of identity. As much as when we're in the process of caring for people, we can't wait for it to be over, and we wish it was over and we wish we didn't have to do it. But then it stops and you're like, what do I do with myself?
Mm.
Who am I now? I was able to turn my phone off at times. I was able to not necessarily have it glued to my hip. The phone didn't ring every single day, and that was a huge adjustment for me.
You asked one of my favorite questions, if not my favorite question in the world, and that's who am I? And I feel like we ask that question over and over. And ultimately, I do believe everyone has a certain calling and a certain thing that we do in life. But after each loss, whether it's loss of career, whether it's loss of a parent, a child, a friend, whatever, I think we ask that question again. It's almost like a reset of maybe a check-in process of who am I today, right? Like how has this changed, or how is this event going to change me? And I think it's really necessary that we keep asking that, because it's almost, you can see us being molded as humans along our lives. Who I was at 10 years old, at 20 years old, uh, you know, post divorce for me, at 28 years old, who was I? And who am I now? And really, who do I want to be tomorrow? All those are involved, but I can imagine that, spending a large amount of time in caregiving for, a decade, that's a huge question, because you've got a clean slate, honestly. And I hate to frame it that way, but that's true. It's like when your mother passed away, it's like, wow, who am I and where do I go from here? But it seems like you have made meaning out of that and out of her death, and you're helping people. Did you have a vision for that before, or maybe during your mother's illness, that you would
No,
make?
I
Okay.
did not. What I actually didn't know that my career right now existed until after my mother died. Um, I was scrolling TikTok late one night because I couldn't sleep, as one does, right? And I came upon my mentor, and the banner said, "Grief coaching, ask me questions." I was like, "What is that?" And so I stopped and I listened, and it did not resonate with me right now. I
Mm,
kind of thought, who is this crazy person spewing this, BS? But something she was saying kind of planted a seed in the back of my head, and I found myself continuing to watch her videos and things like that, and going to her workshops. I went to her support groups, and I actually did not plan on going into coaching. Even when I took the certification course, I thought it would help me process my own grief.
mm,
And I thought, it would help me answer the question who I was, because I actually walked off my job about 6 months after my mom passed. I just had
mm.
I was in commission sales, and I was at a point I couldn't do it anymore. And I said, 2 weeks of here, 2 weeks, and I'm out of here. And I
Yeah.
had no idea what I was going to do. I was going to take the summer to figure it out. And so I did that, and I traveled, and I realized that both of those things were so helpful and could be so helpful together. I actually started Grief Clarity Labs in hopes of running retreats and grief retreats, which actually will be happening next year, starting next year. Um, and so that was kind of the path I took. So it was kind of a windy road.
Wow. Yeah, I think, like I said, sometimes our calling finds us. We don't find it, and sadly, sometimes it has to be through loss.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm glad that you have found your way, and that clean slate, honestly, started being painted along the way to get you to where you're at. That's great. So, when did you start writing your book?
So I started writing my book about a month after a little less than a month after the anniversary of my mother's death. I had a session with my grief coach, and we were talking, and she asked me the question of, well, who do you want to be now?
Yeah.
Who do you want to be, and who do you want to be in the future? Your mom might have defined who you were, but she doesn't anymore.
Hmm.
So who is that person? And I kind of was processing it and thinking about it, and I started writing about my mom and who I wanted to be. And I was like, I want to be a grief coach. I want to run these grief retreats. How can I do that? I can become an authority in the space. And so I started processing that and writing the book. And then the book came out on Mother's Day of
Hmm.
this past year, of
Very
this year.
nice. Yeah. What a tribute. That's nice. What all do you cover in the book?
So the book is called, I also realized I didn't give the title. The book is called Living Beside the Leaving. And it is basically stories of my experiences caring for my mother. And then at the end, what I learned from it.
Very nice. Yeah, I think it's that'll be a helpful tool for anyone that's going through it or has gone through it, and always trying to understand, what is this? And again, I don't think that we'll all have understanding unless we personally go through that.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would have done differently looking back?
That's a loaded question, isn't it?
It is.
Um,
Put you on the spot.
no, well, I mean, because of course I would have just forced her to get diagnosed earlier, honestly.
Okay.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the easy way out of that question. But what I would have told myself to be present in the moment more.
Mm,
I
yeah.
spent a lot of time kind of going, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. And what I try to talk about with my clients is, this sucks right now,
Yeah.
because it doesn't always suck, and it doesn't always have to suck. And there can be good moments. And, you know, I spent a lot of time trying to pull her into my world rather than entering into her world. And I wish
Mm,
I had spent more time doing that.
mm. That's one thing when I used to do couples counseling. I said the exact same thing that there's a shared world and there's no growth that happens there. This is, we both like fillets, we both like hiking, we both like cruising, all the common stuff exists in that world. But really, where growth occurs and understanding occurs is when we take those moments to go to the other person's world. And it takes either an invitation from that person or sometimes a knock on the door that says, hey, I want to know more about you. And, for example, my wife likes to dance. I can't stand dancing. I'm just going to be honest with you. She knows it. This is no secret in case she listens to this podcast. But if I want to connect with my wife, I go to her world and I dance. Like, I can guarantee you tonight, if I asked my wife to dance to our wedding song, she would be mine the rest of the night, whatever I
Oh
wanted to
yeah, she
do.
would melt. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So you're right. Being present and going to the other person's world is huge. And I don't think we do it with uh, the sick or the healthy, really. We are a selfish people if you think about it. We want to do what we want to do. I have really tried to work on that the last couple of years myself because I know I'm a selfish person. It's like, okay, I don't want to eat, whatever she wants to eat. I want to eat what I want to eat. Or I don't want to go there. I want to do what I want to do. Or no, I don't want to go there. I want to stay home. It's I've had to work on being selfish. And I can only imagine, especially when someone has further limits, especially how many places can you go with someone that's deep into Alzheimer's, right? It's, you worry, like if I take mom to the grocery store or whatever, will I lose her? That's a real reality for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned something else earlier that I wanted to touch on. And it's certainly, you said your mom got to a place where she wanted to stay, but a lot of times people get to a place where they want to go because they don't feel like they're at home. You did mention that briefly, but
Yeah.
I saw a lady
Well,
one
that, yeah,
time.
that happened too. That happened
Yeah.
too.
I,
That was later. The number of times I came over and the car was packed, and
yeah.
because we had had a second home, and so she often packed the car.
Mm. I saw one lady state, don't fight them. It's going to be, don't fight them with words, at least. She made this like her mother was trying to leave one morning or whatever, and instead of her stating, "Mom, this is your home, you can't leave," whatever, she said, "Okay, but first, why don't we go in and get your coat in case it gets cold?" And that was a way to redirect her mother back into the house safely and kind of divert and get her mind on something else. And then it can be like, oh, look at this picture over here. Who is that? And, you know, pretty soon her mom didn't know that she was trying to leave it all. And she's
Exactly.
back
I
to
mean, I
safety.
can remember fighting my mom when she didn't realize I was her daughter, and showing her, going and getting my baby book and forcing her to believe that I was her daughter. And look, mom, these are the pictures of you bringing me home. This is us together. Look at all these
Mm.
happy memories. And then she went and called the cops and said that someone was forcing her to keep this baby against her will.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
it's that is so hard. Like it's my heart hurts to hear, just what you've had to
so
go
it was,
through.
meeting her where she is was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's all you can do because you won't win a battle. When it comes to Alzheimer's, I've stated the same thing about delusional people. You went to Mars last night and ate with the president. Okay, tell me more about that. It's you don't sit there and say no,
What'd
you
you eat?
didn't. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I feel like you said, meet people where they are. I think we have to do that in the grief world as well, right? Like
Yes.
I can't assume that your model of grief has been my model of grief, or that my way of grieving the loss of a parent was the way you did. And luckily, I've not gone through the loss of a parent yet, but um, I can't assume that everything that I do is the way that you need to do it. So,
Right.
how do you deal with people that maybe have had a parent lost to Alzheimer's where your experience was wildly different than theirs? Have you ran into that yet, or do you see more similarities?
Well, I actually have, and I mean, we were in a situation. There was, even judgment during the process. We were in a situation where we were forced to put my mom into a memory care, and that
Mm,
is a big but hot button, right? A lot
sure,
of people have a lot of strong feelings about that, and what I try to do now, I didn't at the time, but what I try to do now is try to understand where they're coming from and kind of say, look, there's cultural biases, right? There are
sure,
cultures out there where that is paramount to, giving your parents the finger, right? It's,
sure,
and that's just not accepted. And so to understand that other people have their own biases, and it's not really a judgment or an idea of what you did, and to work again to meet them where they are, right? So if my client says, oh, I can never put my mom into a memory care, that's just not acceptable. Okay, I might explore why, and find out what the reasons are why. but then accept that and not necessarily argue or push that.
Sure. Do you feel like grief has any predictable patterns, or do you feel like I guess each person's grief is fundamentally different?
I mean, I find that each person's grief is fundamentally different. And I mean, I can never fully understand your grief. You can never fully understand my grief. There are similarities.
Sure.
There are, yeah, there are similarities to the similar experiences, but so much of the grief is also defined by our relationship. Like my sisters and I don't grieve my mom the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we were brought up in the same house, we're grieving the same person, but we had different experiences just from the order we were born in and our relationship with our mother, that we all grieve very, very differently.
Yeah, and anybody out there researching birth order, Alfred Adler spoke of birth order, and I think it's there's some truths to that, just who we are individually, but then in the grief world, I'm going to write that down. That may be something that I have to start doing some research on, like how the firstborn grieves versus the baby, or the middle child grieves differently. And ultimately, I do believe it is relationship driven. You could have uh, a child who had a really poor relationship with the same parent that, the golden child had a relationship with. It's there's always that, but I would say birth order does have a really large place in the grieving process. I'm really going to study that.
Well, that is an interesting thought process. Although I was the oldest, although I will always say that I think the middle child and I were born out of order. Simply because if the middle child had been the oldest, she would have been an only child. She was a nightmare toddler.
uh,
But um, although, and I have to say, I think there was a lot that did actually, that's an interesting point, because as I'm thinking, that did kind of affect my caregiving and my grief, because there was guilt of, I'm the oldest, this is the hat I should be wearing,
mm,
and I'm letting her wear it.
you you
So that
used
that
a
is actually very interesting.
Yeah, you used a very dangerous word there, and that's the should word. I always
Yes,
say the
yes, yes.
the shoulda, woulda, couldas. We always sit there and think about, oh, I should have done it, and really what it does is just form guilt all around us, and make us think that we could have done something different. And
Right.
and
What it really
honestly,
is us looking for control, right?
sure,
Because guilt
sure,
is a secondary emotion. And
absolutely.
guilt is very often us hiding the fact that we are helpless and had no control over the situation. So our brain is telling us we had some control that we didn't.
Yeah, control is an illusion. I often speak of that. It's we want control. We want to believe that we have control, but ultimately there is not much that you control in this life. I've always said you can really narrow it down to two things in our Western world, and it's what you put on your body and what you put in your body. Everything else is out of control. I can't control you. I can't control politics. I can't control healthcare. We have an element of input, but it's not control. I can eat healthy. I can stay off of drugs. I can, you know, seek proper shelter. I can do all the right things, but still have a bad outcome. So ultimately, do you have control? Not much.
No, no, you don't. Um, and it's, what you do with that experience that really informs it.
Sure. Carolyn, tell me anything else you want about the book. And certainly, I really appreciate all your input today. And if there's anything else that you want to touch on that we've not touched on, we've got just a few minutes left on the clock.
Um, so the book is on Amazon. It's called Living Beside the Leaving. And the one thing I try to leave everyone I talk to knowing is, and it relates back to the control, is we can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose what story is told about it.
Mm,
That I think we do have control over.
mm,
And so by choosing how we tell that story, that ultimately influences the experience. And if anything has resonated with you here today, I am offering a 30-minute call
okay.
at griefclaritylabs.com/call.
And
And it
I'll
is
have,
absolutely free.
yeah, I will put all of your information in the show description as well in case someone wants to reach out to you. Um, I don't know that I've asked this question in several episodes, but I generally like to ask some thought provoking question at the end. And I'll ask, like, what do you want people to say of you when you're gone?
For me, the big thing is she showed up and she was there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And there's so many people in our lives who don't show up, right? And it's a really good message for me to think about how am I showing up for the people in my life too. So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, she showed up the way I needed her to.
Wow. Excellent. Well, it sounds like you've got a servant's heart anyway. Being a caregiver, you have to. I'm going to openly admit I I I can't imagine that I would be a really good caregiver. Like if somebody needs someone to talk to, absolutely, I'm your guy. But caregiving, especially from a physical standpoint, I don't. Uh, I'm glad I have two sisters. Honestly, I mean that is. I'm serious. Like
I do hear a lot of men say that, not to get too gender biased, but
I think there's truth to that though. Like I am not a nurturer by nature, right? It is just not in my genetic makeup. And I saw that early on with my daughter. Uh, Her mother and I were divorced very early on in her life. In fact, we were separated by the time she was 11 months old. But I remember I was a pretty good dad, and I had this 1 year old kid every other weekend for a full weekend by myself. Thank you very much. I did a pretty good job. But when she was sick, it was a whole different ball game. And I remember, a couple of times where she's just like, I want my mom. And I'm just like, I felt so defeated. Like I'm a horrible father, And so all that to state, I don't think men are great nurturers. We're not. There are a few really, really good male nurses out there. Like there are some really good people who have good bedside manner, good care for others, but I'm not that guy.
that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, we all have our strengths, right?
Right.
So when somebody just needs somebody to ramble on and talk, please call me. I'm your guy. That's my job. Maybe that will be it. I'll be the person who sits with my parents and just talks their ears off and discovers what they really think about me. So oh, goodness. Carolyn, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. I hope people reach out to you and find your book and learn more about certainly how you were affected, but certainly anything they can pick up as far as, how do I deal with someone that is suffering with Alzheimer's? And I'm sure that you offer a lot of insight in that. So, and just in the grief world in general. So we thank you for what you do. And I thank you for being on this show.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we close out?
I think we're good.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. I will have Carolyn's information in the show description. Please reach out to her, grab her book off of Amazon, and we will catch you on the next episode. Have a great day, everyone.